Legislative Conference webinar entitled Non-Ratepayer Energy Efficiency Options. I'm Ann Roberts, Policy Analyst for the Southern Legislative Conference, the Southern Office of the Council of State Governments in Atlanta, Georgia. I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists for setting aside time from their busy schedules to be here with us and for enlightening us on the positive impact that energy efficiency can have on states. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. You are all in listen-only mode. If you wish to ask a question, please use the question box on your GoToWebinar toolbar. You may type in a question at any time during the webinar, and we will get to them at the end. This webinar will be recorded and posted on the CSG Knowledge Center website, knowledgecenter.csg.org, and on the SLC website, slcatlanta.org. Finally, please understand that the views expressed in this webinar are not necessarily the views shared or expressed by SLC. Rather, they are intended to serve as a platform for discussion. On June 2, 2014, the Environmental Protection Agency released the Clean Power Plan proposed rule under the authority of 111D of the Clean Air Act. This proposed rule allows states to meet state-specific goals to limit greenhouse gas emissions. As states consider their options for meeting their specific goals, concerns have emerged that the proposed rule could result in higher energy costs for utility customers, also known as ratepayers. Given these concerns, SLC states are considering ways to meet emissions standards through efficiency mechanisms. This webinar will examine energy efficiency opportunities that can help states achieve their emissions targets with minimum impact to their energy portfolio or average electricity rates. I'm very excited about the panel we have with us today. Our first presenter is Al Christopher. Mr. Christopher is the Director of the Energy Division of the Virginia Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. This department is tasked to enhance the development and conservation of energy and mineral resources in a safe and environmentally sound manner to support a more productive economy. Prior to his role leading the department's Energy Division, Mr. Christopher was Executive Director of Virginia Clean Cities, a nonprofit coalition supported and funded by stakeholder members and the federal and state departments of energy. Mr. Christopher was a second-generation fuel distributor from 1989 until 2007 and a newspaper editor and reporter for 14 years, working in Hampton, Virginia, Tampa, Florida, and Washington, D.C. Our second presenter is Mr. Bob Dixon. Mr. Dixon is the Vice President of Enterprise Sales, Americas and Industry Affairs, Building Performance and Sustainability for Siemens. He is responsible for strategy development, market positioning, enterprise sales, and industry leadership to business, industry, and governments on efficiency and sustainability in buildings for the Americas region of Siemens. He previously served as the Global Head of Efficiency and Sustainability, Vice President and Senior Advisor to the Management Board for the Building Technology Divisions of Siemens. And in this position, he was responsible for advising government and business leaders on global initiatives for building efficiency and sustainability to reduce carbon emissions and energy consumption and conserve natural resources. He serves on the boards of directors for the National Association of State Energy Officials, the Efficiency Valuation Organization, and the Energy Services Coalition. Our third and final speaker is Mr. Chris White. Chris White is a professional engineer, and as the State Utilities Program Manager at the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority based in Atlanta, he oversees the state government's $200 million annual energy spend. He helps state agencies manage and improve their facilities, and he runs the State Energy Performance Contracting Program. This year, the Georgia Environmental Finance Authority is enabling 7 agencies to complete $87 million worth of work that will help cut more than 25% of the utility usage at the project locations through the implementation of energy performance contracts. Over the course of his career, Mr. White has worked as a consulting engineer, as an owner's representative for IBM and the state of Georgia, as an energy performance contracting vendor for Trane, and as an energy advocate as founding director of the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, and as a lobbyist for the European manufacturers of railway equipment in Brussels, Belgium. Finally, Mr. White has the pleasure of riding his bicycle to work every day. Thank you to all three speakers for agreeing to participate in this webinar. Mr. Christopher, you now have the floor.
Thank you. As you can see from the second slide there, the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy covers a lot of energy ground. The Energy Division is one of 6 forward-facing divisions there, and we deal mostly with energy policy, including development of a comprehensive energy plan for the state every 4 years, and updated in between gubernatorial terms. And we serve as the State Energy Office, and our programs include mostly efficiency, probably half of the staff, and renewables. And those include primarily offshore wind. We haven't had a lot of land wind development in the state, no utility scale, and solar. And there we have some new initiatives in the Virginia Energy Plan. And I'm going to talk about our efficiency programs, including performance contracting, how we fit in the Clean Power Plan under the proposed EPA regulation, and a project that we recently were awarded in partnership with the states of Georgia and Kentucky to try to arrive at some I guess consistent and consensus EM&V processes to get greater value from performance contracting energy benefits, to be able to use those for compliance with the proposed EPA regulation. Next slide, please. There's one view of performance contracting, and we're up over $500 million in about a decade-old program, and we basically provide owner's agent services with a technical support specialist who works with state agencies and local governments, including schools, public bodies, to implement performance contract projects. We have some other efficiency programs, and the Energy Plan sets some pretty audacious goals for increasing the performance and the penetration of performance contracting in state and local government in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we are, for example, we have a goal of reducing electricity consumption in state agencies by 15% by 2017 from a 2009 baseline. That's a pretty tall order. That will require a great increase in the use of performance contracting and other efficiency programs. If you move to the next slide, this just shows you where Virginia fits in the state emission rate goals for carbon emissions for 2030. Virginia has more stringent reduction and rate goals than a lot of states, and there are a few that have more stringent goals than Virginia. But needless to say, there's a big gap to implement that regulation. My division and my agency is not the lead on that. The Department of Environmental Quality is in Virginia, but we're going to be a major contributor to complying with that proposed regulation if it is implemented, because efficiency and renewable other zero emission sources of energy production are going to become the main way to achieve the rate in Virginia. It's lower than, for example, the rate in Virginia is lower than the new rate for a combined cycle gas plant, gas generator. And if you would go to the next slide, and this is a bit of an eye chart, forgive me for that. It was just an easy thing to put together because we had to do this as part of the grant proposal. And as you can see, the Georgia GFA is one of the partners with DMME, and the Department of Energy Development and Independence in Kentucky is another. And we have a couple of other states who have supported us who are not full partners. Tennessee is one. The SEA, the organization that Chris founded in Atlanta, is a partner, as is NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Officials, and NACA, the Air Quality Agents trade group. And I don't see a logo, but the National ESCO organization also is a part of this team. And the attempt is, Virginia is one of the many states in the Southeast that is not a deregulated state for utility structure. We are still a vertically integrated, regulated monopoly. We have that kind of a structure in the state. We have some, but not very large and not very old, and well-established demand-side management programs offered by the utilities in the state. Those are increasing, but we therefore have a need to capitalize on the considerable investment that are investments that are made in non-ratepayer energy efficiency enterprises, including performance contracting. And because we don't have utility overseen EM&V, the idea behind this proposal is to try to develop some consensus and pilot some strategies that would allow states that are deregulated or that are not deregulated to capitalize, and in any states for that matter, to be able to harvest another benefit from performance contract investments by reaching an EM&V approach that is going to satisfy, that's going to be satisfactory to the air quality regulators, so that they will accept those benefits, and therefore that we get an additional value from investments in performance contracting in the state. I believe I have about 5 more minutes, so I will talk about some of the other aspects of the Virginia Energy Plan. It is revised every 4 years when a new governor is elected. The governor in Virginia cannot serve successive terms, so the Energy Plan is a pretty keystone document. It is the way that a new administration gets to set energy policy. It lays out a strategy that is a 10-year strategy, but it's revised every 4 years, and there's an interim update in the midpoint there to change course as needed. And some of the goals for efficiency, I'll just mention a few of them. A chief energy efficiency officer, a cabinet level position, has been created to oversee this. There will be a board on energy efficiency created to help provide subject matter expertise and additional oversight. And one of the goals that will be implemented with our help and the help of many others is to reduce the consumption of electricity in the Commonwealth by 10% by 2020 over a 2007 baseline. We're about halfway there, in part because of the economic downturn and in part because of increased efficiency in the state. Per capita use of energy is pretty reasonable in Virginia. We're not a high industrial, we don't have a large industrial sector, one of the smallest in the Southeast, in fact. That's going to be the statewide goal for energy efficiency, or one that affects every consumer in the state. And then there are a lot of goals for state government efficiency, including, I think I mentioned already, the reduction in electricity consumption by state facilities by 2017 to a 15% reduction from a 2009 base year. Increased marketing and outreach to carry the performance contracting message and other efficiency best practices to local government and other public bodies, and to assist them in the same programs that are provided to state agencies, and to create a energy data registry and dashboard so that we will have a good way to benchmark and track progress by agencies toward achieving that goal. With that, I think I've about used my time, and so I will stop there, and I believe be available for questions after all the presentations are concluded.
Hi, everybody. This is Bob Dixon of Siemens. I'm the Vice President of Industry Affairs for the Building Technologies Division. Al, thanks a lot for your comments. You and I have known each other for a long time. It's once again great to be working on this stuff. I'm going to come at the next 15 minutes from the viewpoint of a implementer of energy services performance contracts as a methodology to help reduce gas and electric consumption, which of course we know reduces greenhouse gas emissions and the like. Several years ago, I happened to be at a conference, and somebody asked me, you know, what is going to be the event that maybe makes the idea of doing energy efficiency really take hold? And I remember it must have been 8 or 9 years ago, I said, I think it's going to be the environment someday that makes that all occur. And I have a little 3-slide cartoon sort of that explains how that is. So next slide. Is this a time where we're going from awareness to hammer? And you can see the scientist is writing on the board, climate change and global warming threatens our existence. And for an awful long time, everybody has been sort of, I would say, maybe a little bit asleep, you know, to what are the potential implications of climate change and global warming. Next slide. The scientist does a little bit of erasure and then puts up his last slide, so next slide, that says the U.S. EPA's Clean Power Plan and energy efficiency and renewable energy compliance options is now in discussion, and you can see that everybody is finally talking about this as a real issue. And I think in some way we've now gone from awareness because somebody is going to use a hammer to try to help us reduce our carbon footprint. And so the question might be, why buildings? Next slide. Well, the fact of the matter is that 40% of the world's energy consumption is in buildings, and they do, in fact, emit 21% of the greenhouse gases. But what most people don't realize is that when you look at the life cycle of a building, energy accounts for over 40% of the building's operation cost. Very little of it, in turn, I mean 20% of the total life cycle cost is really in the design and build. So that other 80% are buildings that are existing and things that, using what we call an energy services performance contracting program, can help reduce that consumption and that time. And it's a really important thing to do because these are programs, in fact, that can be put in place very quickly. So there was a consortium of 8 companies, Siemens, ourselves, Johnson Controls, Honeywell, Trane, United Technologies, Schneider, Noresco, and Ameresco, that have gotten together to work on creating a white paper describing how the use of energy services performance contracting as an inclusionary measure or methodology in the implementation plans can help state air regulators and state energy officers meet their individual targets. Next slide. We've identified it into fundamentally 10 different items. It's sort of a way that we describe what we think could be done. I'm not going to go in great detail in any of the 10 due to time, but in the presentations that are going to be made available to you, there is detail between each of those 10 bullets. But let's talk about each of them just a little bit. So the establishment of a third-party delivered energy efficiency program. And the first couple you will see are very programmatic in nature. So our recommendation would be that to make sure all states have enabling legislation to allow performance contracting to be done in the existing buildings. And at the same time, we think it's really important that there is an executive order from the state governments targeting public sector reductions, and this is sort of leadership by example. And lastly, it is important for the well-being of the program that the energy service companies have qualifications standards so that all companies are able and capable and can deliver on their commitments. And I think it would be greatly helpful if the contracts are all standardized just for speed of implementation. When you think of bullet point number 2, include energy efficiency program in the state implementation program. And of course, we need to follow the EPA guidelines to assure that the emission reductions are permanent, they are enforceable, they're quantifiable, and if there are surpluses, how to benefit from that. Including third-party program savings and emission projections after adjusting for energy imports and savings funded by other state programs like utility incentives, all really important things. Then when you sort of get past, putting a program in place, projects have to be done because out of projects come the benefits and being able to address the hope of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the things you might find interesting, or you may already know, about the energy performance contracting industry. In fact, it's been around for 35 years. There have literally been thousands of buildings done, not only here in the U.S., but around the world, and literally billions of dollars in projects. So how does that sort of work? Well, typically, there's a preliminary audit to determine the feasibility of a project, and does it have savings? Can it pay for itself? Because one of the things we do know is that these projects are going to have to be funded, and if they can be funded out of the energy savings, that great is really, really great. It will typically go through another step where there's an investment grade audit that really hones in and allows a company to guarantee the savings. And in all of these plans, you'll always see things that they call M&V plans, which is measurement and verification. There's financing plans, there are utility incentive and rebates, and emissions credit. When you get on to the project, one of the things we think is important as a coalition is that the ESCOs need to submit their projects in pretty significant detail to a state program administrator or maybe to a national energy efficiency registry for approval and review. Without doing that, then it's going to be really hard to capture the savings and the emission reductions over time. And of course, you then eventually, transition to a thing where we actually install and commission projects. And an ESCO is one that literally goes out and builds in existing buildings energy efficiency retrofits, things that are pretty simple in some cases, lighting retrofits and chiller and boiler modifications that actually can become even much more extensive and sometimes include putting renewable energy sources on a customer site. It is important that when we install these projects, we commission them so they work really, really well and meet the commitments. We will typically go through a pretty exhaustive measurement and verification of the projects. So an ESCO would say, here's what we have promised the client, here's what we are doing. We go out and measure it, and we verify that it's working. And if, in fact, for some reason they are not meeting the stipulated and guaranteed performance of a project, then in fact an ESCO will compensate the client through either additional services or through actual cash back to make up for any shortfalls that might be there. Those are typically pretty rare. Most of the ESCOs in today's world are accredited by the National Association of Energy Service Companies, which is not only an industry organization, but they create standards on how we should go about our business. Then once you get past any project-specific stuff, it's important to go back into the programmatic view of things, and the programmatic view would say, let's evaluate, measure, and verify the program as an entirety for the state. So that would be a state function to make sure all of these projects that may be implemented are in fact reducing the consumption and improving the emissions from the power plants. And if in fact there are issues where this type of programmatic approach is not achieving the ideal results, then of course it needs to go back and be re-examined and ensure that whatever fine-tuning needs to be done in order to make the program more robust, it absolutely needs to go forward and do that. Next slide. As was mentioned in that way too lengthy bio that Ann read of mine, I do happen to have the opportunity to serve on the National Association of State Energy Officers, and in particular I work with the affiliates. And the affiliates are a large group of companies. You can see all their logos up there, and I'm sure every week we add a couple more. But we do want to absolutely assist the states in the getting ready for this hammer, as I would call it, that's about ready to come down. And part of what my message was to the affiliates and what my message is to you, our organizations are learning what this all means. You certainly have our commitment that to be involved and participate in the dialogues and help with areas in the state implementation plan where we may in fact be able to educate on energy service performance contracting. We might be able to educate on measurement and verification of energy savings and emission savings, because we have a long history of the measurement and verification world. And lastly, we are prepared to deliver measurable, real results when this finally goes into effect a couple of years downstream. Next slide. And so that's all, but I love this quote by Thomas Edison: "Opportunity is missed by most people that is dressed in overalls and looks like work." I think sometimes when we look at this impending regulation, we look at it through the lens of, oh my goodness, this is terrible and look how hard it's going to be, and we don't look at it through the lens of what opportunities might be created. And certainly for our industry there will be some jobs, but it will create some employment. Other opportunities will come out of this that we haven't probably even envisioned, and I think it certainly will help move the needle. And through this we can in fact reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and that's what this is all about. Next slide. And if anybody wants to reach out, touch me anywhere downstream, I'd be more than happy to have a dialogue. And with that, Ann, I will turn it back over, and I think Chris is next up.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon, for that excellent presentation. Mr. White, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bob and Al. What we've looked at so far is one state's view. one of the service providers, and now I'll just go into performance contracting a little bit. In case we missed a little bit of some detail, I kind of laid it out very simply and showing you what a particular state can do with performance contracting and is doing with it right now. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of GFA. We work in energy, land conservation, and water resources, largely financing. Next slide, please. Our water resources division works on water systems, water, wastewater, and reservoirs, financing that work. Also, water conservation and energy savings at those kinds of facilities. Next slide. Here's a bit of an overview of some of the funding sources. Next slide. We're over $4 billion now of loans in the state to local and county governments. Next slide. And just a quick slide, again, this is an eye test, but some of our loan rates, and including energy conservation at water, wastewater, and landfills, can be as low as 0.5% with the right circumstances for a 5-year, and only up to 1% for a 20-year loan. So we do have some great opportunities in the state for local and county governments to access energy efficiency and renewable energy loans, as you see. Next slide, please. And the energy division that I work in, we have, and Bob, I'll go back to some of your 10 steps, and this is kind of inside of performance contracting. We do have enabling legislation that brings the performance contracting program to life. We have a program with standardized methods and documentation, and we have an executive order for a 15% reduction in energy use from 2007 baseline by 2020. Next slide, please. So this is the big E on the eye test. What is energy performance contracting? And as Bob, one of the companies that is active in Georgia, for a performance contract, there is one company, we call them energy service provider or energy services company, ESCO, who comes in, evaluates, designs, installs, and sometimes operates energy conservation measures. That's the work that gets done, like lighting or boiler modifications, with guaranteed performance. And there's also an annual measurement and verification that's conducted, and that makes sure that everything's working to the levels that are guaranteed in the contract. So we do have a procurement process that gets you to one company. That's another step that we have. And the important thing to see is there's going to be a utility savings through the modifications that are part of the contracted work. That is going to result in an amount that the company guarantees. So that guaranteed savings now reduces your actual utility spend, but the amount that is reduced is balanced by some additional costs that include the debt service on the loan, maintenance, measurement and verification, and sometimes training. So, but those, at least in our model, the guaranteed savings always exceeds the contracted cost. So you could look at it as a program that provides work without going outside of your budget, doesn't add additional cost, and it sounds great, but it does pay for itself. And just as a little bit of a benchmark, I believe for the last year, the energy services market, the market that the ESCOs produce in the U.S. was about $5 billion And here's a list of the energy service providers that we have pre-qualified that's part of our process. And it runs from companies that have equipment that they sell and may integrate into products like Honeywell or Johnson Controls or Siemens and Trane, to companies that are purely vendor neutral and can bring any combination of options together. Next slide, please. So here's an example of that reduced energy or utility spend with the contracted costs being covered by the guaranteed savings. Next slide. So if you are a government entity or even a business, I put together a slide that shows what costs you might have, and in the procurement and during and before construction, you may opt to have your own consultant that can help explain and translate the needs that you have as an entity into the project. And during the construction, you may also want to carry over that consultant or other management, but the energy service company, the ESCO, is going to come in largely as a like a general contractor, but they'll be evaluating, they'll be doing design that they'll keep checking back with the owner on, arrive at a set of decisions that generate the energy conservation measures, the work that gets done. They'll contract a lot of the work to be done, and then they'll initiate the processes and get the building up and running. And then after the construction, there will be some of that ongoing maintenance, there will be debt service, and there may be some service agreements and training. And during the construction, the money for many of the costs that are associated with it will come from the financing, which you're going to pay back over the life of the loan. The term that you may choose, we have actually in our enabling legislation required a constitutional amendment to allow state agencies to repay in more than 1 year. So we have a limit of 20 years. That's a long time for most projects. Typically, we see somewhere between 10 and 15 years as the project term on the repayment. So the construction might take something like a year, and we'll then have repayment during those 10 years. Now, after the payments are made in full, that energy savings will be realized in full, and then you could reduce the utility budget if that was where you were paying all of your contracted costs out of. Next slide. Here's an example of some of the contract costs. This is an example from a project that we had. The hard costs, actually the construction. There are services that the ESCO is providing, engineering, design, project management, commissioning. That all adds up with overhead and profit. And there also can be some agency costs that are financed in the project, and that could include a contingency and some of the reports that are generated, like the investment grade audit. Next slide. Here's an example of what the cash flow might look like on a project, where you'll have in the blue circle on the left the savings that are generated, and these are projected at the beginning. You'll have utility savings, operational savings, and get a total savings. Then the ESCO will take a number that they can guarantee, and then so you have savings, and then on the other side you have contracted expenses, and that in our case we always say that it has to be positive net cash flow. So at the end of this project, it didn't just pay for itself, it actually generated a cash flow. So on a $5 million project, it was about $400,000 that was generated out of that. That would be left in a utility budget, and you could think of things you might do with that kind of money. Next slide. Here are a few examples of the projects that we have going this year. We have $87 million for these 7 projects, and this is third-party financed money. So this didn't come through appropriations. This isn't out of anyone's budget, not even out of my budget. We have pre-qualified 4 lenders, 4 banks that are in our finance pool, and they are going to be bringing the money, and at the end they'll get paid back out of the savings that's generated in the utility budgets. Next slide. So when do we want to do this? Well, one of the big areas is when you have no budget for self-funded work. You may also have little experience with engineering systems. When you have one of these companies come in, the ESCOs, they have a lot of experience. They bring new technologies and new application in because they're doing this all day long, all year long. And you may have a need to cover certain aspects in your building that, a boiler, for instance, that might be 25, 30 years old, and it's an expensive item to keep going, but sometimes there's no money for replacement. If that could be bundled together with the lighting upgrades, it can turn a 30-year payback into a combination of something like 15-year payback. You may also be interested in what is possible for your buildings. The expertise that is in the energy service companies is extensive, and it sometimes is a good place to start to see what kind of robust approach to upgrading your buildings there might be by contacting one of these companies. And you also may need to document utility savings. Because of the guarantee, the contractual requirement for a level of performance to be delivered, the measurement and verification becomes a very important aspect, and it is one of the main ways that you can be sure that you are getting what you paid for. Next slide, please. So what are some of the benefits? You are contractually guaranteed, and you are measuring your savings. Always a good place to start before you have a project, but if you haven't been measuring and keeping track of your utility usage and managing that, then when you start into one of these projects, you become very aware very quickly of what benefits you get out of keeping close tabs on it. You also get an integrated project analysis, design, and construction. And I'll jump to one of the last points. It's a single point of responsibility. So there's one team with one contact that you can come to and be translating what you need and what you want out of your facilities into the work that gets done. Gives you the long-term monitoring of the savings and performance. And it keeps your staff and personnel operating the facilities at an optimal level, because there are people who are keeping an eye on it for you. And the services and materials are based upon the quality and life cycle value rather than just the lowest first cost. Next slide, please. And how could you get started? Well, I've provided a few links here. We have a lot of information on an internet website that you'd be happy to share with you. We have the pre-qualified energy service providers that we have qualified in Georgia. Their names and contacts are at that link. You may wish to consult with an engineer or a professional who is familiar with energy performance contracting, and of course you're always welcome to give me a call. And you can also see we have put together about a 60-page manual which is directly focused to supporting the agencies that we have in the state performance contracting program, but could give you a good background on performance contracting down to a fair bit of detail. And we have a set of template documents, both for the contract and the financing part, that if you would like to take a look at those and even borrow them, we'd be happy to share that. Next slide, please. That's about it. I'd love to hear if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Chris. And we will entertain some questions. This is Carrie Abner in the Lexington office of CSG. It appears that Ann is having some audio problems, but I'll be happy to ask any questions that have been submitted. And I'm just waiting on those to come through. Okay, for Mr. Dixon, energy efficiency regulations spurred impressive innovation in the automotive sector. What kinds of innovations have you seen in the building sector, and what innovations do you forecast for the future?
Thank you for the question. I think you know, the building stock has lots of opportunities as we go forward. You know, we have been designing buildings for fundamentally the same way for a long, long time, though the technology's changed. So what do I see changing? One is the use of renewable energy creation embedded right in the building, and so that may be as simple as solar panels, you know, on the rooftop. They may be embedded in, you know, the walls that, you know, face the exterior, capturing those things. It may be using micro turbine wind applications, you know, right on a site in order to create, you know, use nature's resources, in fact, to create power, when therefore we don't have to rely, you know, on the power plants. I think inside the buildings what you will see is the design to evolve to more of what I would call an eco-space orientation. We typically design the big and then go to the small, big buildings, and then figure out how it all works internally. And I think as we go forward, we will be optimizing individual spaces, and it's the sum of all those individual spaces and their optimization that will create the whole. And so things, it may be, you know, advances in technology in room control, you know, automated use of blind technology, automated use of the ability of glass nowadays. You can actually get it to dim down and let less energy through. There will certainly be advanced uses of occupancy sensors like we've never seen before. So you will see a lot of evolution over time, being able to optimize individual discrete spaces as a mechanism to optimize the whole building. And then I think there are a lot of advances being made in the optimization of central plants and the air distribution system. Some of the technologies and control logic behind that have really taken some huge steps forward in the last couple, 2 or 3 years. So I think that you will see a great deal of optimization inside buildings and the way buildings are built.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And for Mr. Christopher, could you elaborate on how you built a coalition of states to determine a consensus approach for the evaluation, monitoring, and verification of ESPC programs?
Sure. Well, the idea was probably born from I guess the 3 or 4 years of meetings attended by state energy offices, public utility commissions, and air quality regulators. So the 3 N's, I guess, NASIO, NACA, and I forget the third acronym. There's been, part of that was in anticipation of the proposed rule from EPA, and part of it is just common sense to help comply with air quality regulations in addition to carbon dioxide emissions. The energy efficiency, or negawatts, are pretty clean, right? I mean, there are no emissions attached to them. So there's been an ongoing interest, and I believe the proposed rule in the news, or the anticipation leading up to it, is part of the impetus for this. NASIO organized, there were some states that had already expressed an interest in this, and there's been some collaboration in the past with between Virginia and Georgia, for example. We worked together on an industrial energy efficiency project. Georgia was the lead on that and involved three or four other states. We haven't worked on Kentucky in a particular grant, but we've worked together, and they are a neighboring state. They were selected partly because we share some common ground, that we're regulated states with pretty active non-ratepayer programs that have a lot of additional value that could be applied, in this case, to help comply with the emission standard, proposed emission standard.
Thank you so much. And this is Ann Roberts. My audio is back up and running. Our next question is for Chris White. Mr. White, could you elaborate a little bit on the Georgia legislation that enables performance contracting in the state?
Sure. The first hurdle that we had was the state agencies were not allowed to enter into a contract for greater than 1 year. So that took a constitutional amendment to get that out of the way. Now they're able to enter into contracts for energy performance contracting up to 20 years. The other aspects of it really helped define the program, gave ideas of the procurement procedure, the mechanics behind the program, and it's a fairly short document. I think I even have that on the documents that I have on the link that I've given you, and it was developed. Both the legislation and the program were developed in conjunction with the Energy Services Coalition. So we were working with the companies that were going to become the vendors for the program, so that it all made sense. So we weren't trying to recreate the wheel. We were looking to pick the best wheel that was there and use that to move things forward.
Thank you so much, Chris. We're running out of time and need to wrap up the webinar. If there are any remaining questions, please forward any of those questions to me, and I will work on getting responses from our presenters. Thank you to our speakers today for their contributions, and to my CSG colleague, Carrie Apter, for her help with all the technical aspects. We certainly kept her on her toes today. Thank you to all of you for spending an hour of your afternoon with us. I hope you found this webinar useful and informative. If there is anything more that CSG or SLC can ever do for you in your work, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thanks again, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.